two, one. Okay, I could even see it bouncing in here already. Check one. Check one, two, one, two. Check one, two, one, two. Mic check one, two. Check one, two. In here. Check one, two. Check one, two.
which would allow you to visit the 28 embassies or residence. Always an important moment. Last year we were about 100,000 visits, physical visits, which makes of this event the bigger cultural event EU-sponsored outside of the EU borders. It has been a pleasure also to work with the 8 member states who have specifically co-sponsored also this program, but I would like to thank Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovenia. And it has been a particular pleasure also to work with New York University. I would especially like to thank Thomas McIntyre, the Assistant Director for External Relations and Special Program of NIU, and Michael Dinicia, who is, as you know, the Associate Director of the John Bradimas Center for Excellent and Enthusiastic Cooperation. Very modestly, Michael, you have not insisted on the fact that you were here to explain Congress and how Congress works to public servants, European and Americans. I think this is a proof of the width of the kind of issue you can embrace, and thank you once again for helping us in this important task.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Rivasseau. I'd also like to thank Dr. Constance Whiteside, Senior Outreach Officer for the delegation, who helped pull all of this together with us. Following our discussion here, please join us for a reception upstairs in the lobby, where you'll be able to see works from the independent illustration exhibition brought in by the Slovenian Embassy. Then we will reconvene down here at 6:30 for the reading of Before After. I think it's appropriate that we meet here at the Washington home of NYU. NYU is an institution which has, over the past 3 decades, grown into its truly global perspective. And as the panel on the play today will explore, this contemporary global worldview really transcends that divided world we experienced just 1 generation ago. Indeed, our students today can scarcely imagine what it would have been like to live in a world separated, as Winston Churchill coined the phrase, by an iron curtain. But the arts can, in such a visceral way, reawaken our memories as well as convey to the next generation a reality that can't be experienced through textbooks. John Pfeffer's play, Before After, will bring us back to this time of a divided world with the literal iron curtain of the Berlin Wall, built to keep people in and ideas out, but also of that heady, hopeful time after the fall, filled with opportunity, but also painful reassessments. We have an excellent group of panelists who will provide the cultural and the historical context for Before After. Our moderator, Natalia Gleason, is a Hungarian-born director, now living in Washington. She ran drama summer camps for teenagers in Budapest, was a young writer at London's Soho Theatre, facilitated drama therapy sessions in a psychiatric ward, composed an improvisation performance fusing ballet and comedy in Baltimore, and most recently directed Moises Kaufman's 33 Variations at the Silver Spring Stage. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and I turn the program over to Natalia.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much for everybody for joining us on such a sunny, beautiful day. I hope we can match the weather inside. It is such a privilege for me to participate in an event like that. As well as a theater director, I'm also a sociologist. And I believe that good theater is always the beginning of great conversations, asking questions and finding out more about people and ourselves. So when John asked me to direct this play, I was ever so happy. And I hope that I can do justice to this fabulous panel who assembled today to introduce the play from a very different perspective. So we start the day with a conversation, and we will continue the day with a more artistic interpretation of this multitude of voices that could tell us the story about how it was to live under the regime and then what were the expectations and hope after. So I would like to hand over to the panelists and ask each of them to introduce themselves and also to share one memory or impression that stayed with them and hopefully will resonate the most with the audience today. So if you wouldn't mind starting, Robert.
Okay, I'm almost the youngest here. I didn't ask you for your age, but I will not do it. So that's why I'm starting. I prepared a small presentation. It's very personal. can I start with it?
Please do, that would be
Okay.
lovely.
Are you interested in it? I never presented my life to anyone. Okay.
I think they
Okay.
are.
So, this is here 1973, and you can see a page from Red True. This was the actually only newspaper that we had that always was true, of course. And you can see the president, who was at the time the communist president Svoboda, next to the Czechoslovak army. In the same time, I'm sorry.
You didn't introduce yourself and say
Oh,
which country
I'm sorry.
you're from.
I'm sorry. Okay, but it will be clear from the moment. The country will be very clear because here is another picture. Did you hear about the group Plastic People of the Universe? Yeah. Of course. There were some like group of people in Prague. That means Czechoslovakia. Thank you very much. And I represent the Czech embassy here in Washington, D.C., so I finished my introduction. And they wanted just to play their music. And what happened was that the regime didn't like their hairs, as you can see, and the way that they don't play the social songs, and they play what they want, and actually very wild and uncontrolled. So they came to them and said, you know, you can't play. But if you just a little bit cut your hair, we let you play. And they said, no. So then they said, okay, if you just a little bit change the name, because Plastic People of the Universe, in English, it's not really socialist, if you want. And they said no. After several times, actually, they were prohibited, and they were put into the prison. And some people, including Václav Havel, started to write the Charter 77, which is the major manifesto against the regime and to supporting the human rights that should be kept in communist Czechoslovakia. In 1973, I was born. I brought you some very personal picture that I never presented. That's my father. My father worked at the town hall, but he could never get a really important position because he was not member of the party. So there was a strategy that you are punished if you are not member of the party, and also your children will be punished that you are not member of the Communist Party. So it was very sad because on the end my father was cleaning the floor at the philosophical faculty, and that's why I was in my age of 5 or 7, I already attended philosophical faculty of the Charles University. So here is my mother with my brother, and this is very nice picture that I like. Okay, the communist preschool. We were very happy and smart children, and this is our first car, Trabi, which Trabant, which was made actually out of plastic. I was happy that we never crashed because it would be the end of our lives. My brother actually took this sign. My father was mad because it was so precious legacy, this car. This is my textbook. It's a very funny story, but do you know Colorado potato beetle? Probably you don't know. But the communists, they said, actually the American imperialists are sending the beetles to our country eating the potato. So my textbook was about the American beetle, and we actually all, it's written here, about the bad beetle, Mendelinka American beetle, who is stealing from our plates. So you Americans who are here, so you didn't know that 20 years, 30, 40 years ago, you were stealing from our plates through this American beetle. This is my great house. It's very similar to our Bethesda apartment, as you can see. Such a block of houses were built around the country. Everybody has a flat, but it means, actually, I call it rabbit houses, like you have in the farm, many rabbits next to each other. So I was living in one of this window, like hundreds and thousands others, and there was no value, like human value. You are just one box in this block of flats. I heard from my parents about the Prague Spring 1968, and they were so disappointed because of the armies who entered our country that they had no hope for change. And the revolution, a few years later, we had to do, we as a students, because they said it can go wrong, we don't want to take the risk again. We had to think as a pioneers, and we should to be standing next to the memorials. You can see our faces, how happy we were. Okay. And also very nice people behind us. They are the leaders. Okay, you can see, only on their faces you can see the character of the people. Then it started to melt down, and there were some like mirrors that the communists is starting to fall apart, and the events in Germany started. And suddenly you could see on the walls like Havel and so on. And in those days it was very funny because my face was broken, and I was from Prague, and I was studying high school, I was 16, in another town, 100 kilometers from Prague to the east. And this is my school. And once I went for some lecture about the religion, actually the next day, secret police, or actually regular police car was in front of our school, actually two of them. And I was like, wow, what's happened here? 2 police cars in the school. Somebody murdered? They were because of me there. Because somebody reported me that I went for a lecture about religion, so they sent 2 cars to investigate that. And after they left, the director of the school came and said, Robert, you are on the socialist school, you can't be interested in such a things. We know you are from Prague, and this broken face is from the demonstration there. You will have to leave the school if there is one more issue like that. Luckily, the revolution came. You can see the Germans are climbing the wall in Prague into the German Botschaft, embassy, and the revolution came. So you can see here, it's a big demonstration on November 17 in Prague. Actually, deep in communist times, the people still had a great sense of humor. In the official newspaper of the Communist Party, the Red True, was published, like you have the announcement, you know, with like somebody has a birthday, somebody that. So somebody published in 1989, before, long time before all the revolution, published a small article that on October 5th, 1989, Ferdinand Waniek had the birthday, and we friends of Ferdinand Waniek, we congratulate to him, like, happy birthday. Of course, this is Václav Havel's picture, and the Ferdinand Waniek is one of the key figures from his place. So this prank joke was actually a very heavy problem for the editor of the newspaper, who was kicked off the newspaper. But all the country was laughing that we succeeded to have Václav Havel, who was in those days a dissident, in the newspaper with the happy birthday congratulation. The students were beaten on the main, one of the main roads in Prague, and actually the revolution started, and there were many protests. And this is from the revolution. Do you see the person here?
It's you?
Okay. I would like to finish my presentation here. Thank you very much for your attention. Just to tell you that after this really moving time of revolution, I could change my studies into what I really wanted. I studied humanities and became a diplomat. And the prisoner, Václav Havel, who was in the prison, you can see 2 pictures from the prison, became a president. And me, who was almost kicked from the school, I could study in West Germany, which was really great. And I became a diplomat, and I could introduce the plastic people of the universe in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for that.
Lovely. Now, if you would take it over to you, please. Yes, please.
I'm Theo Christoph, and I currently teach at George Washington University. I'm Bulgarian, grew up in communism. In the summer of 1988, I was 12. Robert was 15. That tells you the age
16.
difference.
Okay.
16. So, and in that summer of 1988, I was in 5th grade in middle school in the English language school in Bulgaria in my hometown, Russe, which is one of the, as you will hear from the play, one of the main protagonists comes from that same hometown, my hometown, Russe, as well as from the same high school. And I entered a competition, which was a competition on the cultural and ethnic diversity of the Soviet Socialist republics. And this was in the spring of 1988. And I submitted my a long essay, which was almost 300 pages, a very massive piece of work that I borrowed many ideas from various encyclopedia, the available Soviet encyclopedia, to write about the various ethnicities and various cultural groups in the Soviet Union. I almost forgot about the fact that I submitted this application, this essay, and in the fall of 1988, I received a notification that I had won the 3rd place of this essay. So I had to go to the post office and pick up my award, which, to my joy, I went to pick it up, and it was like a package. And I opened it up, and there was the form to tell me that I was awarded the 3rd grade, the 3rd place. And there was a plastic thermometer, and that was my big award. And I was very excited about all of that. Now, this is sort of a prelude to tell you why this was so important in my further development as a pioneer. And then going back to the very happy faces of the pioneers of the day, because in 1989, I was one of 12 from Bulgaria who was invited to partake in a camp in Czechoslovakia. We didn't have Czech Republic, we didn't have Slovakia at the time. And to my surprise, I was one of the very few whose parents were not members of the Communist Party. And to this day, I really don't know why I was selected and why I was invited to attend this summer camp as a pioneer. I was very excited about the opportunity, and this was my first time to leave Bulgaria. And because my hometown is right on the Danube, Russe, you cross the bridge and then you're in Romania. So all the kids, 12 of us, traveled from my hometown, from Russe. We took the train and we traveled across Romania. We traveled across Hungary until we arrived finally in Bratislava. And I was so impressed by what I saw in Czechoslovakia. And I remember there was a department store that in fact had goods in it, something that we didn't really experience back in Bulgaria. And to me that was just very surprising. It was very clean, I remember, as well, and very green. And that was some of the things that really surprised me. I come from a town which had been, some of you may know the history in the late 1980s. There was a lot of chemical poisoning because of a factory across the Bulgarian side in Romania of a factory. And as a result, we arrived in Bratislava, and from there we went by bus to the north of the country, which is today Slovakia, in an area called the Red Monastery, and that's where we were based, all the pioneers. Very happy pioneers from the Soviet Union, from Romania, from Bulgaria, from East Germany. And we were there for a month to dance, to talk to each other, to be joyful in the experience of these happy pioneers growing up and sort of this cultural exchange. And I very much enjoyed it. And when I returned to Bulgaria in August of 1989, I was invited to give reflections on my experience in this summer camp in Czechoslovakia. And to me, this was a really pivotal moment because by the time I was already in high school, this was my first year in high school, This was in October of '89, and just 2 months after that, in December, again, I'm going back to my hometown, Russe, which is literally across the river it's on the river across from the Romanian city of Giurgiu. And this was a moment, as some of you may recall, starting in December 16th of 1989, with some of the first revolutionary moments in Timișoara in Romania that extended all the way across Romania into Georgia as well. And one of the things I remember, which was my first year in high school, was in the third week of December of 1989, where I could really hear the shootings of the revolutions all the way in Bulgaria. There was just a river that was dividing us from the Romanian side. And this has really been sealed in my memory as one of these moments unlike anything I had experienced, partly because Bulgaria was a very peaceful transition of power. We were essentially told that there was a transition of power. We didn't really have any revolutionary moments. We didn't have our Prague Revolution. We didn't have our Hungarian Revolution. And this is the way that we experienced the transition. And this was the moment of the pioneer, which I have to say became less and less happy with the experience. And this is the pioneering story of the moment before. And after was simply the revolution. And then 6 years after that, I found myself here in the U.S. Going to college. So that was my pioneering experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. I remember that was a great trauma for me because I was 6 when it happened and I never became a pioneer. And you worked so hard to get to that point and it was forever denied.
Well, that was my sad story because I never became a komsomol, which
You
is
see?
in high school
It's
where you can
terrible.
become. Yeah, so my cousins became, I could never have that chance because it was too late. I was too young for that.
Let's hand over to Hannah, see if she has a...
Hi, I'm Hope Harrison, also from George Washington University. And I am going to talk about Germany. I think I'm the only one here who didn't grow up in one of these countries. I was growing up far away in the United States, but I was studying Germany, and I was studying the Berlin Wall, which is something I still teach about, the fall of the wall 25 years ago now. So I learned Russian, I learned German, and in the summer of 1987, I went to the Soviet Union. I spent the summer in what was then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, the beautiful city on the north, built by Peter the Great, spectacularly beautiful place. And I was there for the summer to study Russian. And it was an absolutely fascinating experience. It was the beginning of Gorbachev's reforms of Glasnost and Perestroika. The first free regional elections took place that year. The press had been revolutionized. Finally, there was really freedom of the press, and people were learning about things that had always been taboo. Because the economy was so bad, they didn't have enough money to print lots of newspapers. So on every street, they would put up a newspaper behind glass on a kiosk for people to just come read the newspaper for free out on the street. And people were gathered around these newsstands reading what some people had known because they had experienced, but which many others didn't know. All sorts of crimes from the Stalin period, starting to read about the truth of the crackdown in Hungary in 1956 or the Prague Spring in 1968. Just this incredible time of people coming alive. And as a young American there, I remember, of course, being nervous and excited and wondering, how are people going to accept me? And one gorgeous summer day after classes, I took a boat trip along the river, and suddenly all the old ladies, the babushkas on the boat, realized there was an American in their midst. And they surrounded me and stopped looking at the beautiful Winter Palace and the Peter and Paul Fortress, but just bombarded me with questions. What is life like in the United States? They'd heard things. They'd heard a lot of bad things with communist propaganda, but they also had heard some good things, and they were very curious. And that was just an extraordinary experience. 2 years later, in 1989, I was preparing to go to Berlin. And in the lead up, I had been reading about the mass demonstrations of East Germans on the streets, calling for freedom of travel, being able to go across the wall to visit their family and friends in the West, demanding free elections, demanding all sorts of change. People had been escaping, other people had stayed and taken to the streets, and I was so curious to see what was going to happen when I got there. Well, I was on the plane headed there on November 9th, 1989. When I touched down the next morning, November 10th, in Frankfurt to get the commuter flight to Berlin, everyone was reading the newspapers, these huge banner headlines that said, "Die Mauer ist offen," the wall is open. And I thought, is my German not as good as I think it is? Is this April Fool's Day? It's November 10th, April Fool's Day. What is going on? And the pilot got on the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, in case you haven't heard, the Berlin Wall fell last night and we are flying into history." So I touched down in Berlin hours after the wall had opened, and I was there for 10 extraordinary days, saw the bulldozers lifting up pieces of the wall, East Germans coming streaming through, either walking or in their Trabants, West Germans showering them with flowers all over the hood of the car, or giving them money, or giving them champagne. People were selling champagne on the street corners. It was just an extraordinary experience. And I wanted early on to go over into East Germany, and one of the first nights I tried to get on the metro in West Berlin to head into East Berlin, except it was impossible. There were thousands of East Germans coming out of the metro. There was no way I could make my way through to get on the metro. So I waited a few days till I could finally head over and attended some demonstrations of those courageous people taking to the streets, demanding free elections and all sorts of other things, and have been going to Berlin ever since.
Lovely, thank you for sharing. I guess we have a story from Poland coming
Yes.
up. Much.
Hello, Maciej Pisarski. I'm of the Embassy of Poland. And in 1987, when I graduated from my high school, I had pretty good idea what I would be doing for the rest of the life. I was heading to Warsaw from my hometown, Radom, which is 70 miles south of Warsaw, to study history at the university. And I thought I would spend, after the graduation from the university, I would spend the rest of my life teaching history. This is what I like to do, I thought. So when I arrived, and of course the communist system seemed to be very strong. You know, we in Poland, we had a very turbulent decades after that. But anyway, the Soviet Union seemed to be permanent and eternal. So I headed to the university in Warsaw, and what I saw was a big banner hanging on the university's wall, and the banner said, "Set Havel free." 87. So I mean, okay, so it's different. It's a little bit different, and indeed, the atmosphere on the campus was completely different. It was like a little bit of island of freedom. I mean, the forbidden books, or so-called samizdat, was almost openly sold. I could have a subscription of my illegal press. And then the organization that I joined, the Independent Association of Students, which was associated with Solidarity, I mean, acted almost openly. I mean, but outside of the university world, the world was different and kind of familiar to me. Demonstrations were forbidden. Every now and then, somebody from my colleagues was caught on during distributing leaflets and spent few days in a jail. but nothing really happened that bad comparing to the beginning of the 80s, where people were actually shot during demonstration and political crackdown. Then it started in winter 1989. The negotiations between the authorities and the opposition, represented by some people associated with Solidarity, they started talking. Of course, the objectives were different for both parties. The authorities wanted to kind of make the opposition part of the system, and then they counted that they thought the opposition could help selling the tough economic reforms, and of course would take part of the blame and responsibility for a tough economic situation. And of course, the power would be held by the Communist Party as always. Well, the opposition just had to grab as much freedom as possible within the existing geopolitical order. I mean, winter 1989. I mean, the Soviet army was in Germany, was in Poland, so we knew that there were some limits. The result of the talks, which are right now known as the roundtable talks, was kind of interesting. I mean, the new elections were scheduled, which were very peculiar elections, because 2/3 of seats were guaranteed to the Communist Party and its allies. So it's difficult to call them free and fair. But a second chamber of the parliament was created, so-called Senate, with all seats up to grabs. So it was interesting. And then the election day was set for June 4th, 1989. And on June 4th, it was Sunday, I returned to my hometown, and then I was a part of the election monitoring team associated with the Solidarity Committee, and my polling station was my former high school. So I was very proud about that. I returned to my high school. The head of the election commission was my former was the principal of the school, who I knew very well as a party member, but otherwise good person. So the whole day was very intensive, very long. And then we counted votes, and at the dawn of the next day, when all votes were counted, I remember I spoke to a gentleman who was in the commission actually, and he represented the Solidarity Committee, and I said to him, they lost everything that they could have lost without the legal limits. And we are very excited about that, but also kind of anxious. I mean, we didn't know what the Communist Party would do, what the Soviet Union would do. Would they kind of let us go, or would they march in as it was in the past? Anyway, the June 4th proved to be the turning point. In August in August same year, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, a Christian Democrat, was appointed a first non-communist prime minister in the Eastern Bloc, and then a serious works started primarily to turn the economy around, because the economic situation was catastrophic. Simultaneously, the work started on building the fundamentals of democratic system, but it really sped up after the events in other parts of the region, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the package reform which was introduced was known as shock therapy. and that really lived up to its name. It was a shock, and it was therapy. And then when I look at at the number, today, and when we have all these discussions about austerity, not austerity, problems, in some countries of the European Union, I mean, these are just staggering. I mean, the unemployment, which was absent, which was unknown phenomenon during communist time, really sprang from first year 6, then 12, then 20%. The inflation skyrocketed 250, 650%. GDP dropped by 12% in first year, and wages decreased by 1/3. So it was just in the for the beginning. That was, of course, the cost to kind of reintroducing of market economy into the society. Now we know it worked well. I mean, it's GDP grew 3% in 1992, and it continued. And it has continued to do this till now. Poland had a GDP per capita 33% of the EU in 1989. Now it's 67%. So it was quite successful, but at the beginning it wasn't really that simple and and then obvious. I mean, the costs were significant. Let me finish with quoting from Lech Wałęsa, the Polish president, who in 1996 said that we are pioneers, different type of pioneers, of course. We are venturing along the tracks that nobody else before us followed. The transition from capitalism to communism is easy. One decree on nationalization solves the problem. However, the transition from communism to capitalism is a totally different matter. It is easy to make fish soup from the aquarium with living goldfish, but just imagine what challenge it is to try to make the aquarium with the living goldfish out of the fish soup. And I think that it's... Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move over to Hungary, I think, my fellow countrymen.
I'm impressed.
You are?
I'm impressed by these young people. I'm by far the oldest here. So some bragging rights, but it's kind of amazing and fascinating stories. And of course, it's also fascinating to see young people who did not have to make the tough choices between becoming members of the party, not becoming a member of the party. In most cases, the access to bananas and Western washing machine won, and you became a member of the party. But I wrote a book which is coming out in the fall, and the book is really about being a rock and roller behind the Iron Curtain. Mm-hmm. That would be me. I was never going to be an official. Never going to be a diplomat. I was never going to be an economist, which I all became. I was going to be a rock and roller. The book is really about rock and roll and why it was so important to us, plastic people of the universe. I happen to admire and adore. And I just want to say this because the book really is about why rock and roll music, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Cream, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, why they were the internet to the West for us. But the book really has a chapter which is totally different. And it's interesting because it dovetails with some of the stories here. I chose a chapter. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I'm going to read parts of it so that you get a feel of kind of what it was to be a Hungarian 16-year-old at the end of August 1968. So the title of the chapter is Prague Defeated. And it was like a big explosion, a declaration of war, an awakening to siege. Suddenly, I, the second grade student from Stephen I high school, became a grown-up overnight. It happened on the 21st of August, 1968. And Peter, my friend, the bass guitarist in my band, came to our home on Fürstander Street unexpectedly and unannounced around 7:30 in the morning. An unusual time for a visit. I reluctantly opened the door. He did one of his cynical long faces, which he always did when he was not feeling comfortable. He had this strange expression. I was curious. "What's up?" I said. "Haven't you heard the news?" Peter asked. "What the hell is going on?" "What news?" I responded, unaware of the situation. I suddenly got nervous because my friend displayed anxiety. I felt the usual sudden cramp in my stomach I would feel when scared of a situation, afraid that something close to me, something bad happened to someone close to me. Czechoslovakia was invaded at midnight. Bill Ramsey, you know, our American singer friend, called from my mother from Munich, and he was asking if we were all right, he continued. Invaded? By whom? I went on asking him. Bill called at dawn and said that the Warsaw Pact had marched into Czechoslovakia and is confronting the people in Prague. He said Hungarians were among the occupiers as well. Alexander Dubček, the Czechoslovak leader, you know, the funny-looking guy, was forced to resign. Many of Bill's artist friends in Prague are fleeing or were by now rounded up, he told my mother. It's the end of the Prague Spring, he said. He was not able to say more because the conversation was cut off. The phone went silent. Bill was an American who was a star in West Germany, but had made an effort to build friendships in Eastern Europe, primarily Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Peter's mother was a friend of his, and she was doing work with television as a choreographer. Peter and I had been debating the Prague Spring recently. We talked a lot about the awakening there, the new wave, signs of freedom and democracy, the opening to the West, real debates about real issues, honesty in the press. Was all this coming to an end? We were also talking about Czechoslovakian class before the summer break, and the young history teacher was so enthusiastic about what was happening there. He even said that the Hungarians and Czechoslovaks should hold hands because they can change things for the better in the Soviet camp. We were encouraged by him. The day before, on August 20th, Hungary had celebrated the Day of the New Bread, also called St. Stephen's Day in the past. The National Day, with people looking happy out on the street and an air parade over the Danube, everything seemed to be all right. These were times of hope that Hungary and Czechoslovakia would slowly become a place where it was not a crime to read books by George Orwell or Dr. Zhivago. The American-made film about how the Reds had been killing and exiling members of the old system during the Russian Revolution in the cinema, and where perhaps artists could sing and write whatever they wanted to. At first, I didn't really see the depth of events unfolding until Father too said there was a terrible thing happening to the north of the country and that he too was called upon to stay alert as a reservist and not leave Budapest. Father also told us that this looked pretty much like what had happened in Hungary 12 years earlier in the fall of 1956 when the Russians crushed our own revolution. I asked him to explain the situation because we weren't too sure what was really going on there. It was confusing. Father had an ambivalent relationship with the Russians. One day during the war, he was hopelessly wandering around in minus 30 degrees Celsius in Russia on the front after the Hungarian army had collapsed in the Battle of the Don in 1943. And as he was trying to survive, he came across a Russian soldier who wanted to take away his boots, which would have meant certain death in the cold. As he was pulling his boots off under the gun to hand it over to the soldier, a Russian officer came by, and when he found out what was happening, the officer shot the soldier. and told father to beat it with his boots on. The Russians picked him up on the side of the road and cured him of typhoid fever. He knew, he knew not everybody was as lucky, but for him, this had shaped his strange relationship with the Russians. I was 4 when the Russians invaded Hungary in November 1956, 12 years earlier. I remembered the blackouts, and father would not come home for days, and mother was the one in charge of keeping the family safe. I watched from the window of our apartment how people, including children, got on the crowded trucks parked by our house with their suitcases and small belongings. It seemed to me a nice idea to travel on top of a truck. I vaguely remember the arguments between my parents and at that time whether to go with one of the trucks and leave for Austria or stay, and how in the end father won and we stayed. The way they spoke in the tone of uncertainty, very unusual for us children, suggested that this maybe wasn't just another excursion organized by the trade unions, but perhaps a serious situation. Days later, one morning, Dury and I, my brother, heard a rumbling which I thought was due to an other earthquake like the one in the spring that year. It wasn't. It was tanks. We both rushed to the balcony and stood mesmerized by the sight of the green tanks with nicely done red stars painted on the hatch doors. I had only seen tanks in pictures, but seeing them from this close was exciting. These were Soviet tanks. But what did I know? Mother was screaming, "You come inside." She was probably right. We were not supposed to hang out there with snipers on those tanks watching every move in the street and shooting to kill people, young or old, shooting with Kalashnikovs, probably the first time they had been ever used in combat. Budapest was their guns' debut. More news started coming in about Prague on state radio, explaining the importance of the military action of the Warsaw Pact and how necessary this was for the survival of the socialist camp and the preservation of the achievements of the working class in the socialist world. They spoke of solidarity, a word I had heard endlessly repeated on radio, too often to take seriously. The news sounded dry, matter-of-factual. We all sat in the kitchen behind closed windows. Father, Peter, Dury, and I tried desperately and in vain to tune into Western radio stations, to maybe hear about what was really happening there and make sense of it. Mother peeped in from time to time to ask when she could have the kitchen back to make lunch, because even in the worst of moments, that was her job, that was her responsibility, to provide food for the family at all times. Radio Free Europe and Voice of America was being jammed, with the broadcast coming back only when music was playing. Finally, we managed to catch the Hungarian broadcast of BBC on some unfamiliar wavelength and heard the details of the invasion. The commentator spoke of at least 100,000 foreign troops marching into Czechoslovakia. We sat there for hours, all were very quiet, the radio turned down really low so that the neighbors would not hear, although we suspected they too were tuned into one of those radio stations. Later in the afternoon, after we had eaten lunch Mother had prepared, Peter got the idea that the best way to get this thing off our minds was to move over to their place and listen to some rock music. We pulled ourselves together and got over to the house on Dózsa György Street. There were visibly more policemen on the streets and military vehicles moving around as well. This was not the usual kind of atmosphere. No one was drunk, no one was quarreling. Most of the people on the trolley bus 79 just gazed in front of themselves or at the oiled wooden floor out of the window at the sidewalk. As it passed by the hospital of the Hungarian Railways, I saw a bigger crowd in front of the main gate, agitated. Peter and I got off to walk to the last stop to their house. Some people were courageous enough to debate the situation out in the open, and I could hear, but not quite understand their disappointed comments as we passed them by. They looked sad and worried and angry, and I caught words like "rotten Ruski" and "long live Dubček." And then finally, there was a sort of a strange aftermath to this sad day. About half a year later, news got out that the Beach Boys are playing a concert in Prague. How come? Why would the Beach Boys, a top American band, be allowed to play in Prague? They had just been victim to an invasion by Russians. Some of my friends went to the concert and came back enthusiastically. Dubček was in the crowd. And you know what? The Beach Boys greeted him with special respect, which must have been a great satisfaction to him and an annoyance to the secret police. What a nice thing to do. The Beach Boys must have known that their concert was more than just another gig. They recounted the event. News came that the Czechoslovak authorities did everything they could to break the former leader. If he's broken, the people of Czechoslovakia will be broken. They assigned him to a garbage truck team. That job lasted for one whole day. The news spread about his whereabouts like wildfire. And wherever he showed up to collect the trash, there would be hundreds of Czech citizens greeting him. His day on the job turned into a day of demonstration, and it lasted precisely one day.
Thank you very much. John, would you like to finish up the rant or playwright?
Thank you, Natalia. So I'm John Pfeffer, and I am the author of Before After, the play that we'll be seeing in about an hour or so. Though author is not exactly the right word, because in some sense, what I did was collected stories, much like the stories you heard right here. Tremendous stories that I thought I had to turn into something like a play, because they were dramatic, and I thought they were well suited for a dramatic audience. I thought with these comments, I would just give you a little explanation of where the play came from. And it starts pretty much the same place that it started for Hope, because I too studied in the Soviet Union in 1985, a couple years before you did. And because of that experience, I very much wanted to go back abroad, anywhere abroad, after I graduated from college. And eventually, I did get an opportunity to go to Poland. And I arrived in Poland in 1989. 1989 for me was the best of times, and in some sense the worst of times. The best of times because I arrived basically just before the announcement of the roundtable negotiations between previously outlawed Solidarity trade union movement and the Polish communist government. And I came to Poland with a list in my pocket of Solidarity contacts that I had transcribed laboriously into codes just in case I was met at the airport and they searched me. And I arrived and started, making calls. But then I learned very quickly that the person who had brought me over, my sponsor in fact, in Warsaw at Polish Academy of Science, in the psychology department, was not just a psychologist and not just a party member. In fact, when they announced the roundtable negotiations, it turned out that he was a member of the Politburo and in charge of the politics table during the roundtable. See, he was probably one of the top people in the party at the time. So I had contacts with Solidarity, I had contacts with the party. It was an incredible political education for me. June 4th, the day of the elections, the first 73 elections for Poland in 1989. You might remember what else happened.
Yeah,
On June 4th, 1989. I had a good friend who was studying in Beijing at that time, and we were trading information back and forth about our experiences. He was having a great time, all these great demonstrations. I was having a great time, all these great demonstrations. Who was going to have the better time? Elections coming up, June 4th. And then I didn't hear from him. I didn't hear from him at all for like 10 days. Because, as you probably remember, June 4th, 1989, was the flip side of the story. While people were celebrating in Poland, people were mourning the suppression of Tiananmen Square uprising or demonstrations in Beijing. Shortly after the elections in Poland, and this comes to the unfortunate side of 1989 for me, I left Eastern Europe. I was an idiot. I should have stayed, but I was an idiot. I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. People said things are going to happen. I left for reasons that, well, if you're interested in the reasons, I have a DVD on sale, my one-man show called The Bird, all about that year and why I was an idiot and left Poland at that time. But I was given a second chance by the Quakers God love the Quakers. I was working for the American Friends Service Committee. They wanted to set up an office in Eastern Europe, and they hired me to go there in 1990. Travel anywhere I wanted, talk to anybody I wanted to. For 7 months, they paid me $1 or something like that, but I didn't care. I was just so excited to travel around and talk to people. I interviewed people, I collected their stories, I wrote recommendations for AFSC, they set up the office, I did a little bit more work in the region, and then my wife and I went to Asia. We went to Asia to work on North Korea. Why on earth would you do that? You were just there in this fabulous region, tremendous transformation, inspiring human rights stories, but I kind of developed this expertise on communist transitions, and well, y'all didn't have any transitions to do anymore, so you go where the money is. You go where the transitions are, or where we expect the transitions to take place. Of course, the transition didn't take place in North Korea, but I learned the language and started writing about North Korea. The Open Society Foundation, George Soros' venture, gave me another chance, a third chance, if you will. I approached them a couple years ago. I said, I'm kind of interested in what happened to all those people I interviewed in 1989, 1990. What happened to them personally? What happened to their country? Would you pay me to go back and interview these folks again? And unbelievably, they said yes. And that's what I did. And I went back and I collected all their stories. And you can find them online, all roughly 300 of them, all basically transcribed in full. And then I took the best stories and I turned them into a play around the theme of human rights, because I felt that was the strongest theme coming out of the discussions we had. I asked everybody about the Berlin Wall. I wanted that to be one question I asked everybody. Do you remember where you were and what you were thinking when the wall fell? Almost everybody in Germany said, of course, naturally. But outside of Germany, not a lot of people necessarily remembered. It wasn't as big an event in the other countries. Other big events were the roundtable negotiations, or the fall of Todor Zhivkov in Bulgaria, or the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic.
Well, what about me?
And the burial of Imre Nagy in Hungary. Lots of other events somehow overshadowed the Berlin Wall. But I thought the Berlin Wall speaks to people here in the United States. That is the symbol for so many people here of the transformations that took place. But more importantly, it spoke to us of what I thought was the central story. And the central story is about basically ordinary people who take history into their own hands. Not famous people, not necessarily incredibly brave people who have demonstrated that over decades, but ordinary people who become brave. And that's what the play is about these extraordinary achievements and extraordinary experiences done by ordinary people. And I hope you'll stay for it.
We do hope you will stay, because then you'll experience the sort of polyphony and eclectic texture of John's interviews that really give a multi-perspective into the times before and after. And as a Hungarian, I often puzzle about how do we select the stories that we want to tell? How does something become meaningful to us? And the word transition resonates with me very much, because I'm a part of the transitional generation, and I think change is something that defines very much. And I would be curious, what sort of resonates with you most? How do we pick these stories to tell? What becomes meaningful now that we have some recent history to look back at and we are not in the middle of it anymore? Whoever would like to. András.
I think it's, well, all these stories are fascinating, but of course it's most fascinating in the context of the dangers democracies face in Central Eastern Europe these days. What we never thought about is the possibility of backsliding of democracies. So what we never thought about is that dark powers from the East will try to reverse history. And there is a reason why I chose this chapter about the Russian invasion, because often enough, I think about what would have happened had the Czechs and the Hungarians been able to carry through the process of loosening up and changing the country and opening up to the West, because that was really, that was it. And today, once again, I have to be frank and honest, even in my country, there's a real danger of backsliding of democracy. So why I'm so enthusiastic about telling my story, about how we were hoping every single day since 1956, every day, we would try to push the limits just a little further. We would, every opportunity we had, whether you were, you know, almost anyone, except a few idiots on the top of the party, but otherwise, everybody would be looking for small openings and fill it in and go in the direction of moving out of this, which is a straitjacket, which is putting which is constraining society, where you cannot open it. And yet again, I must say that I have fears about Hungary, I have fears about Bulgaria, I have other fears as well. So I just want you to know that the importance of this is exceptional, but I think we also need to make sure that while we're so happily remembering what happened 25 years ago, that we also look at the possibility of backsliding, and that we start doing something about it.
Yes, please.
Thank you for that. I share your concerns too. And for me, it's very strange that we are so happy here and we say funny stories, but North Korea, look, North Korea, there are stories about the children, orphans who are punished for the crimes of their parents who try to escape from North Korea. There is a famine in progress. There are nuclear power. So nobody wants to touch North Korea because they are afraid. There is still hard communism there, and the people are not here with us. And I think for us it's a responsibility, and we should try to be very awake of the cold wind from east, which is coming to our countries and trying to corrupt people and to send hundreds of secret agents to our countries to reverse the situation. And we should be also responsible for the countries where are still in deep communist regimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think that those stories are worth telling because they really emphasize the few very basic things that the East European countries kind of dreamed about through decades, and was basically freedom, democracy, and then being able to kind of fulfill one's dreams and aspirations, and these are, I mean, it might sound very kind of prosaic, but I think that these are still very powerful values and powerful guidelines. I mean, if we look at the situation in Europe's neighborhood, I mean, regardless it's Eastern or Southern, we still see that those values resonate very closely, very strongly with the people. And then, a year ago we saw people in Kiev demonstrating on Maidan exactly for the same reasons. I mean, they want freedom, they want democracy, they wanted decent state. They wanted to kind of be a part of this European community of values and certain standards. I know that the political issues are very complicated, but I think that we should be kind of we should be thinking and doing things that would kind of strengthen these desires and allow them to be fulfilled in a kind of course, realistic but tangible ways. Yeah.
And I think art could be possibly a vehicle of those. And this fusion between art and looking at history and looking at today's tendencies is very much present in before and after. And that's something that I picked up on in your story as well, how one moment in art can really pinpoint very interesting changes and new directions. I remember when Freddie Mercury sang the Hungarian song in Budapest right after the fall of the Iron Curtain. We felt like there was something in the air that is freedom and change, even though it seemed completely unrelated. So I was wondering, before we open up to the audience, if in the theme of society and art working in a fusion together, whether you have either something that you would recommend from your own countries to read, to listen to watch, or do you have one of these Freddie Mercury moments to share? Because we have a couple of those coming up in John's play as well.
I would recommend the Czech way is the humor. So if you want to put the system down, start to make jokes. And I think
that was the
it's
Hungarian way, I think.
Also,
And the Russian way.
so it would be actually great if there would be like very smart people put together who would invent jokes and send to these totalitarian regimes. And we had great person in a history, good soldier Schweik. I don't know if you knew him. So if you have this humor, you can turn the system down.
I think there's so much about black humor in Eastern Europe that in some way brings all of these fairly distinct cultures and societies into a common conversation, because in some way that was the way to resist authority, by this black humor. Oh, did you hear this story about this party member? You're not supposed to say any of these, but in some way this is how people engaged in those conversations. And it was through that black humor that people could express themselves. So I think some kind of recovery of all these stories would be very illuminating.
Interesting. Yes?
If I may, what would be the joke you think had the most impact in '89?
Well, actually, Fidesz had this poster about two Russian politicians kissing and a beautiful young couple kissing that sort of became this iconic. Which one would you like to see or watch?
It's not exactly a joke.
It was a visual joke, visual humor. Although, yeah, you might argue that it's not so funny today anymore, but...
Joke.
Can I raise a different issue?
Absolutely.
Okay,
please.
just because we're coming up to the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II in the next few days, Friday and Saturday. This is a very interesting moment in Germany. As I'm sure many of you know, the main celebrations for years have been in Moscow and Red Square because of the massive role that the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army, played in defeating Hitler in World War II. But as Russia has moved away from democracy, there are more and more tensions between Russia and the other countries, and particularly, of course, since the annexation of Crimea last year and the ongoing fighting in eastern Ukraine, almost none of the countries are going. But in Germany, there is still a bit of a division among people who lived in East Germany. So some of them who were part of the regime regularly, like on May 9th, Victory Day, in the communist part of things, like to wear their old East German uniforms and march to remember the role of the communist Soviet Union defeating Nazi Germany. This is very controversial. There are other people in Germany who want to outlaw being able to wear any former East German uniforms. Think this is an insult to the people who for over 40 years suffered under the East German communist regime. So this is a touchy issue this weekend. Also looking at the response in Germany to what's happened with Russia and Crimea and Ukraine, even though you might think that because the Soviets occupied the eastern part of Germany for 45 years, that everybody would be very critical of Putin and the Russians. In fact, it's not quite so simple. There are many people who sympathize a little bit. But also, there's such a feeling, and this gets to deeper history than we've all been talking about, the history of World War II, the massive destruction of World War II. And Germans, when they look at what's been happening in Crimea and Ukraine, just think anything but war with Russia. Again, anything but war with Russia. Thinking about how many people both sides lost. But of course, what doesn't get talked about too much in that discussion is that the Ukrainians lost over 5 million people in World War II as part of the Soviet Union. And so it's not so simple just to say, oh, we remember the last time we fought against Russia, we don't want to do it again. And Germans feel a lot of guilt for World War II and for sort of what happened to Russia, but it also happened to Ukraine and others. And so there are a lot of complicated issues being discussed, particularly over the next few days in Germany.
Before we move on, I'd just like to, I don't want to get into this. I have some very strong views about the issues that you raised, but I think these East Germans are wrong for the wrong reasons. So that's really my strong view. But there's one thing, a side comment by Robert that I want to come back to, which I think is really the poison that is killing us, killing our democracies. It's corruption. Mm-hmm. It's the most underestimated threat to our societies, and we have not done enough to push back on that. Corruption is killing our societies. And unless we do something about it, unless we are all members of the European Union, unless we, Europeans, and the transatlantic community does something about this, it's going to haunt us generations to come. So I'm very glad Robert mentioned this, and move on to the audience.
Yeah. Could we have the first question, please?
I have one. I had the pleasure of performing tonight in the performance.
A microphone's coming down.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of performing tonight in the performance, and these are stories of individuals, and we've heard all of your stories as individuals. I was a young adult in 1984. I didn't have the opportunity that some of you had to be in Europe at that time and experience it, but our perspective as Americans was unusual. If in 1984 you had asked whether this would happen 5 years later, we said, this is impossible, this would never happen. And yet, in 1989 and 90, and when we were in the midst of it, then the sense of things was that, well, we, meaning the United States at that point, had won the Cold War. And yet, clearly, there was something much larger going on here, so this question is a very large question. How was this war, this Cold War won? How was the situation taken care of in each of your countries? Was it individuals? What had changed by 1989 that allowed this universal revolution to take place? I know that's a very large question, but...
Yeah, maybe I would like just to mention that the Cold War, it was actually a war of different propagandas. And if you grew up in the communist regime and you saw the change, then you thought, now you are in the free war without the propaganda. But actually, if you look back then, you can see the propaganda much more clearly. And the propaganda is still here. It's here. I wouldn't say that the Cold War was won by somebody. I think it's not exactly how it is now, today. I think the war of propagandas are still on, And it's very important that with our experience that we try to share with you, you can see what is going on, and you check the situation from different angles, and you try to see the truth. So this is from my point of view.
I have a strong feeling that we won the Cold War, and we definitely we won in Poland. I mean that was a war of the society against the authorities, the Communist Party and its government, and against its subjugation to the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union collapsed. We were able to get out. So we won this, the Cold War. And then, of course, I mean, we can debate forever. I mean, who won the, the Cold War? I think that, the policies of the United States, institutions that were created like NATO, and especially European integration. I mean, these were very strong, powerful engines for change, because they clearly showed to us that there is an alternative. Mm-hmm. And then I remember very vividly the discussions of the late 80s that we thought that we were very careful to make sure that our resistance towards the communist power was not just this, about distracting it, but it was about rebuilding and reconstructing the normal societies. Normal societies, meaning European societies, having democracy, having human rights, having elections, having some sort of human rights protected, rule of law, and all those things that people in Western Europe sharing, we aspire to share, to share as well. Well, in my opinion, communism was just unviable anyway. I mean, it collapsed under its own burden of unfulfilled promises, and it just couldn't keep up with the arm race and other issues. It was just a huge waste of time in human lives.
I think you can't understand the end of the Cold War without understanding the role of Gorbachev, who opened things up in all of these countries, and people ran with it. These people sitting on either side of me ran with it. I mean, he came to power in 1985. By 1987 and 88, he very publicly stated, we have a policy now of non-interference in Eastern Europe. He said, he essentially said what my predecessors, Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev had done, sending in the tanks to Eastern Europe, to Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 68. I'm not going to do that. Now, he did not, he meant to reform communism. He believed in communism. He just thought that it had been implemented much too harshly. So he hoped for little Gorbachevs in Eastern Europe to be reforming the communist system. But his two fundamental principles of glasnost, really openness, freedom of speech, and non-intervention, allowed all of the brave people of Eastern Europe to push and find out, well, how much freedom of speech and how much non-interference. And they found out one after another when Hungary opened its border to Austria in the spring of 1989. And then when Poland had the first semi-free elections, Gorbachev didn't send in the troops. The Berlin Wall came down a few months later. Gorbachev didn't send in the troops. So just a huge change. So a big part of understanding the end of the Cold War is essentially Gorbachev saying, I don't believe in that competition anymore. I feel Western. I think we are all interdependent. We all live on this planet. If there's a nuclear war, we're all going to suffer. So the combination of, I think, him opening the door and then the East Europeans running through it and kind of not turning around and coming back more than he ever expected, go a long way to explaining the end of the Cold War.
By 84, in Hungary, the debate really was about whether communism could be saved at all. So it was the fight was between the modernizers and the conservatives. And all the things that finally led to 89 were carried out by people in the party and outside the party who were living under the shadow of the threat of going to prison very soon. So it was kind of a funny situation. You mentioned 84. 84 was when we actually realized there is a possibility. There is a window of opportunity coming here. These old guys are dying. They have no idea what's happening in the empire. And we either run for freedom or we're stuck here for the next 40, 50 years. That's really my take on it. And I was pretty much involved in the debates. And but don't forget there were a lot of things happening in Eastern Europe. And one of the most underrated phenomenon in Eastern Europe, you might want to include it, I don't know, I haven't read the play, I have to be frank, I read parts of it, but was the peace movements suddenly coming up. We were very much following what was going on in Poland. But I want to say that the forces of evil were so strong in East Germany and in Czechoslovakia and in Bulgaria and in Romania that Hungary and Poland alone might have failed had there not been something. And please do not underestimate the important role of the perseverance of the West and first and foremost of the United States.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question. Gentleman at the back, maybe two if we... Yes, please.
My name is Intizar and I'm from Afghanistan. Right now there is 102 type of crime economy in the world, and more than half of that is displayed right now in Afghanistan, and we are one of the most corrupt countries in the world. If you go back to Ukraine, so the people are suffer from the pervasive corruption. We just talk about the problems. So what should be the pragmatic solution for the corruption control? How we can harness that? Because it's a big umbrella. If there is corruption, so everything can happen under that. So what do you suggest? Like what should happen in Ukraine and what should happen in other developing countries like mine? Thank you.
Well, I brought it up. I brought it up. Of course, it's a very difficult and complex issue. But if you ask me, I will. It boils down to transparency, accountability, and civil society.
And functioning states. Easy to say.
Shall we take one last one then? The lady in the fourth row.
You mentioned that communism sort of fell under. Hi. You mentioned that communism sort of fell under the weight of all of its unfulfilled promises. And I don't see any sign of capitalism falling under the weight of its unfulfilled promises.
No.
But we have in this country growing economic inequality, which is a side effect and a consequence of the corruption of a capitalist state that we're living in. And I'm wondering if, in your perspective, there are a lot of different parts of Europe, and we see all these indices that show that the northern countries have, a lot more economic inequality and a better quality of life and a higher happiness quotient and all of these things that we admire, and a lot more gender equality across the board, more female leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if you have any disillusionment around capitalism, not just as a propaganda, but as a lived system that you're now living in, not living up to its expectations.
Well, so I think it was me, yeah. I think that Niall Ferguson had a very good line about why communism fell. I mean, he wrote that Soviet Union was able to send a man in the space and construct the nuclear bomb, but never was able to produce a decent pair of jeans. And I think that is very, there is something into it. Well, sure. I mean, we are not, we are not living in a perfect societies and states, and we know it. I mean, it is a constant and permanent process of kind of trying to improve the situation. But from the Polish perspective, I mean, if we look, at the Polish history in its entirety, I mean, we have probably the best period ever in terms of not having our independence and threatened by anybody. I mean, it's of course things are happening on the eastern border, but we are in alliance. We are among other friendly countries. We don't have any problems with the neighbors. I mean, for the first time in 1,000 years. So this is a very good thing. And then we have probably the best shot at the kind of succeeding in modernizing the country. That was, always very elusive target for us in Poland. And thanks to the participation in these processes that are taking place in Europe, we have a fair shot. Whether we succeed or not, that depends on us mostly for the first time.
Theo?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to comment on is that one of the phenomena we're observing today, at least in Bulgaria, I think is nostalgia, or nostalgia if you want to go the German route. I think that many people today really feel that the communism was about gender equality, and there was much of that. It was so much about income distribution, although even that is questionable in many ways. So the question is, how do we preempt those sentiments of the glory of the old communist past, especially in a country where most of the people are really, the majority of them are retired people who were part of that system, and then anything that's new in this new model of the capitalist system is going to be resisted. So I think it's how do you prevent that sort of idea of removing the nostalgia as simply an empty illusion, and what do you put into it? And unfortunately, some of the political forces in place don't always provide a viable alternative. So I don't think it's a question of capitalism versus the nostalgia of communism, but how do we transition to a system which is going to provide the kind of incentives that we are seeing in places like Poland.
The beer was cheaper than water.
I think that's such a beautiful note to finish this panel discussion on. András, we're out of time, but if
I just want to, it's official. I'm out as a hardcore capitalist. Okay, so this is one thing. The second, I enjoy defending America from Americans. Being a Hungarian, having gone through what I have gone through, I'm so pleased to go out and tell Americans they don't know what they have. And the third thing is more general, and I think it's very important. Our societies, our democratic societies, Americans, Europeans, have a correction mechanism. We can correct the problems. We can figure out a way to reinvent ourselves. Dictatorships don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful note.
Great ending.
Thank you so much for joining us. I see hands raising, and of course we'll stay. Please join us for the reception and the performance, and maybe find your panelists in person if you have those to share.
Very nice.
And again, thank you
Very
so
nice.
much for sharing this afternoon with us. We hope that you'll join
Very
us
nice
for the rest of the So nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
Your card.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
I'm so pleased that you like it. Yeah.